All right, welcome everyone. This is the South Carolina State Library's webinar, Keys to Inclusive Programs and Services. I'm Caroline Smith, the Inclusive Services Consultant here at the South Carolina State Library. I have a few housekeeping tips before I introduce our speaker. First, this webinar will be recorded and I will email a link to that recording to everyone who is registered. It usually takes 1 to 2 business days to send that out. During the presentation, feel free to ask questions using the chat feature. And during the Q&A times, you can also unmute yourself, although I will keep you muted during the presentation to prevent background noise. We do have automated closed captioning. If you would like to turn that on, you can go down to the bottom of your Zoom window and click on either the More button or the CC button, and then choose Show Subtitle or View Live Transcript. And finally, I want to acknowledge our funding, which is from the Library Services and Technology Act grants from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, which is administered by us, the South Carolina State Library. And our funding requires an evaluation of this program. So I will send you all a link and paste it in the chat in a few minutes. So please, after this session, look for that link and fill out an evaluation. That's always very helpful in ensuring that we can keep offering programs like this for free, and it gives us feedback when we decide what to plan next. And with that, I'm very excited to introduce our guest speaker today, who is Santee Hohl. Santee is a member of the Santee Sioux Nation and president of the American Indian Library Association. She works as Director of Branch Operations at the Kansas City Public Library, and she has made many contributions to the library field, including serving on the steering committee of the Joint Council of Librarians of Color. She is passionate about Indigenous knowledge, leadership, literacy, and lifelong learning. And thank you, Santee, for sharing that passion and expertise with us today.
Thank you so much, Caroline. I'm so glad to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to share this information with colleagues all over the country today. So it's always nice to see where everyone's from, so I appreciate participants putting their locations into chat, and feel free to post your questions there as we go along today, and we will provide you with an opportunity at the end to ask questions as well. So today I'm going to be sharing a PowerPoint presentation with you. And at the end, when Caroline sends you the recording, there will also be a document with all of the links that I cover here today, as well as a webpage that I curated with additional resources that expand outside of programs for inclusion, diversity, equity, anti-racism, librarianship, leadership, and social justice in libraries. So I hope you enjoy that link as well, and feel free to provide feedback, ask questions, and share your resources as well. I continually update that page so that we have a good spot to look for when we need resources. So I'm going to share the PowerPoint with you. And if you would, please let me know if you can see the full screen.
Right now we see the PowerPoint, but not the slideshow, or not the slideshow view. Now we can see it full screen.
Okay, well, that concerns me a little bit, that my internet might be a little bit slow. So please bear with me as we move through this together. So inclusive libraries, keys to inclusive programs and displays. And I want to thank our host, the South Carolina State Library, for offering this opportunity for us to gather today and to hear some ideas and share our thoughts. As Caroline shared with you, I'm the current president of the American Indian Library Association, which was founded in 1979 at the White House pre-conference. So this was a monumental gathering of nations where everyone came together to say, you know what, we need an association so that we can all share information and collaborate through tribal libraries and libraries supporting tribal communities across the country. As we go through this presentation today, we are going to ask you some poll questions, and we will also put questions into chat. So we're going to start with our first poll question. So this poll is on professional development, and we have 3 short questions for you. If you'd please indicate your response, and then Caroline will share the results. Since this is a program-focused discussion, we will talk about assessment along the way, and a good way to assess participation and engagement is to actively ask participants to participate and to share their feedback as you go along. So a poll is always a great way to start that engagement factor and continue active participation throughout. So it looks like we're here to party today, and I'm real excited to be the party leader on that. And for those of us that are here because we're being forced to by management to receive a professional development certificate, please hang in there. I do feel for you. I've been there before as well. So I have another question for you, and this is going to be a poll, and it's about land acknowledgements. Again, all links will be provided to you at the end. This is a map describing different tribal nations. So when we talk about what is a land acknowledgement, it's a formal statement that recognizes the unique and enduring relationship that exists between all peoples, not just Indigenous peoples, and the land and the territories that they reside in and live upon. So it's something that you're seeing that happen more in the mainstream society and culture, but it's something that has always been a protocol in Native communities. When we gather, we always recognize the land that we're on and our relationship to that land and of course to each other. It's important that we always represent where we're from and that we're always gathering in a good way so that we can share information widely. We can make sure that everyone's included and that we can make sure that at the end of the community gathering, decisions have been made to move forward in a good way. So again, relationship between people, animals, and land. So I see that a few of us have used land acknowledgement in your library, and so that's good to know. For the majority of us, though, this continues to be new information and perhaps a development that may or may not be included in your library, your community, or your region. We had another polling question for land acknowledgements, and I'm asking this information from you to gather where we're at. Since it seems like the majority do not have access to this information, perhaps I will make sure that we cover everything in this discussion. So there's a link at the bottom of Know the Land and why this is important. It's because colonial times really set a precedent in this country. And with that settler mentality came an understanding or a new understanding that individuals had the right to land and that individuals were seeking prosperity and that individuals belonged wherever they wanted to be. Whereas in Native communities, we are always cognizant of the whole. We're all related, we all belong to each other, and the decisions that we make have an impact on our future generations. So as we plan for the next 7 generations, we have to be cognizant of our ancestors, those who have come before us. We honor them in this acknowledgement and hoping that we remember what is truly important and that when we make those decisions, we will continue to uphold those values in making sure that we're making sustainable decisions. So for the sake of meeting in a virtual space, this is also a new component. To recognize all nations, we here today are on the original homelands of the Indigenous people of Turtle Island being North America. So no matter where you are today, you are indeed on homelands of Indigenous people. And so today we gather to share this space with honor, respect, and solidarity. So it's very nice to see all of you. And since our host is in South Carolina, I wanted to include a tribal nation map for South Carolina. You may see some communities that are familiar to you, and there may be some historical communities that are no longer present in your state, and perhaps they have moved to a new area. So again, there's a link provided, and that site has a lot of tribal maps to all different areas. So that's a great place to look for more information. So covering our agenda today, we're going to talk about inclusive libraries, diverse collections, and looking outward into our community, focusing on programs. So when we talk about inclusive libraries, of course, the whole start is a planning for anything. So we need to plan to set the stage so that we have an inclusive library experience where everyone finds high value, they feel like they belong. That's a really important factor, and that we always have something new and fresh waiting for them. So an inclusive library, when management gets together with staff and volunteers and community, it's important that we are looking at what is the communication plan? How are we understanding the needs of our community, and how are we showing respect? So again, that's internal focused as well as externally focused. So we work together to build a climate of trust, collaboration, productivity, innovation, shared power, and creativity. We have a question for you that's going to go into chat, and that's for you to share with us what's happening in your library, in your community. So talking about diversity, the definition being the condition of having or being composed of differing elements. Those many demographical factors that we look at, age, culture, disability, economic background, etc., the list is there. It's always good to look at how can the library continue to diversify our collections, our materials, our programs, our services, our classes, and again, our outreach events. It's the responsibility of all of us to make sure that everyone sees themselves in their library and that there is something waiting for them when they come in. When you want to look at your library collection, there is a few sources online that you can look at in regard to how diverse is your collection. Have you done an audit? Dr. Sarah Park-Dolan has her website where she shares this information. So you're seeing an infographic here, and this study was from 2015. And it shows you at the bottom the different character types in the books for children, what the percentages were by racial demographic. And then also there is the other category, the 12.5% that is animals and trucks. So when you're looking at procuring new items to add to your collection, it's important to know who is engaging with your collection, what are they looking for, and always making sure that you're also bringing in new materials for people to engage with. So over time, this study continues. So in 2015, you can see American Indians were not even 1%. The Latinx community was 2.5, about 2.5. Asian Pacific, just a little over 3. African American, 7.6. And white characters, 73%. So if you look at the demographics of your community, does this fall in alignment with that? If so, publishing's keeping pace with your community and that growth. But if you have more families, more individuals from any one of these groups, your collection should reflect that as well. So moving over to 2018, you can see that there has been some growth, and that's always positive and a good thing. So American Indian characters went up to 1%, Latinx doubled to 5%, Asian Pacific at 7%, African American went up marginally about 35% to 10%, but animals took the lead as we saw authors and publishers decide that animal characters are maybe a little bit more safe and a little bit more accessible, and perhaps children can identify with these animal characters. While we are seeing white characters hold steady at 50% of those stories being published. So it's something to consider when you're looking at your collection development plan is, do we have an actual process in place to conduct audits and to make sure that we are including everyone in the community. We had a question again in chat to ask you a little bit more about, or I'm sorry, it might have been a poll. Caroline, do you have a poll for us? A poll question?
See, I have a chat question about literature awards. Is that the right one, Cindy?
That's a little bit later.
Okay, sorry about that.
It was a poll for,
is it diversity at work or
audits, for diversity audits and collections? Well, we can, if you find it, we can get to it.
Let me see. I think I see it now. Sorry about that. I'm still getting used to the poll feature in Zoom, so thank you for bearing with us.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So here's a question for everyone regarding your library collection. If you take some time to respond, I'd appreciate that. Is everyone able to see the poll okay?
We have a few responses coming in, so
okay, great.
We'll give it a few extra seconds since this question's a little longer. Let's see, we have 14 responses.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, that's great to see that we have some libraries that are actively conducting audits and taking a look at their collection. I see that a lot of us feel represented in our collection, so that's also a good thing. And in looking at the different areas of diversity, that's pretty equal there on those areas being represented. So I congratulate you all on having a diverse collection. There was another polling question that we had for everyone. Caroline, do you want to do the next polling question?
Could you remind me the title of that one? Make sure I get the right one.
Oh, you know, I don't know if I have the title of it. It was conducting a diversity. No, we already did the diversity audit. You know, if it's not listed in line, that's okay. We will move ahead. So looking at what's in demand from communities, this report came from 2018 School Library Journal, and there are a lot of requests in communities. So it's something to remain cognizant of. How can your library provide access to these materials, specifically with these topics, titles, and ranges? So there's a lot of different plans that you can have there. And of course, we're always limited and challenged by budget considerations, but this is a great place to start if you're looking to diversify your collection even further. So a good question for folks is, where can I find diverse titles? And so there are a lot of different places that are available online. You can do a web search and find any of these different locations. I have some suggestions that's going to be in your URL list. So you should have that information at the end as well. And looking at specifically more information on auditing your collection, there are some great resources and tools that are available. And I would encourage all of you to take the classroom library questionnaire, because that helps you really frame what it is you're looking for when you audit your collection, and that you're able to identify not only keywords and usage, but the content as a whole. So here's a example questionnaire. The majority of books featuring people of color or Native Indigenous people. And so, it'll say, it's asking you, are these only related to issues of race, prejudice, or discrimination? Are they culturally specific? Are they culturally neutral? Are they written by white authors? and as I get into the discussion about specifically supporting Native American users, it's important to look in these terms because, of course, all people want to be celebrated, highlighted, and recognized, not just in times of strife or adversity. And another thing is when you're looking at your collection, look for modern storylines. You know, we are modern people, and we're here with everyone living the same mainstream life, although intersections just like with everyone else in all of our identities. So how can you promote books? Well, we know this as you do anything else promoting library services, collections, and materials. Social media is a powerful tool, and it's one that I encourage any professional to engage with thoughtfully, because as you know, there are times where messaging can become misconstrued if the text isn't incredibly succinct, relevant, and timely. You really need to have those factors in there to make sure that you are moving forward in an inclusive approach so that you're engaging respectfully with your patrons online. And it's important to look at what will honor our library and help us be seen in the community as the service provider that we are. So it's always something that it's great to be able to provide book talks and reviews and have those recommendations readily available, but it's important to be cognizant of those other factors as well. So moving over to cultural competency, when you're looking at developing diverse program standards, of course, we have all of our tools and checklists, and I have some of those at the end for you as well. It's important when you're looking at planning that you know who your target audience is. When you're making decisions, are you making them together with the community that you're serving? When you're training staff, are you taking into consideration communications, skill, what's culturally appropriate? When you're assessing, even things like a survey tool may be acceptable in one culture and might not be something that a practice that you would do in another. So when you're building relationships with your community, it's something that you're always wanting to make sure that you are developing that relationship on a strong foundation. So when you look outward into the community and you're going to identify new partners and collaborators to either provide embedded services with or at their facility, or you're going to collaborate on future programming with them, you want to make sure that there isn't a divide right from the beginning. And if there is, you know what, that's okay. If you say something that you didn't have the intention of offending anyone, but you're still informed that that wasn't appropriate, all we need to do is take responsibility for that comment. We need to be genuine in our approach, genuine in our apology, and listen for understanding. Understand why that wasn't appropriate. And the most important part, thank them for providing you with that feedback, because that's just as tough to be able to say, you know, ouch, that hurts. That's not really acceptable. That's not kind. And sometimes it can be things that people in the mainstream just don't really think about because it's a part of the culture and has been. So the way that it has always been done, as we know, can sometimes be a dangerous approach. So we want to make sure that we are being inclusive and welcoming, always welcoming. Well, my screen just got really big. Did it get big with you? Okay, so back to South Carolina. You guys have this wonderful commission for minority affairs. And I was thrilled to find this. And I only wish that every single state had this. So you have advisory committees that meet monthly. This is for in 2 months, the month of June. These are the upcoming meetings. And this is a great place for you to network, to understand what's going on, to recognize the services, and to hear what's coming up in regard to community events and what follow their program calendars. So this is an easy button all day long for South Carolina. Big thumbs up. I'm happy for you guys. So when we talk about cultural competency in Native communities, there are things that they do not teach us in public school curriculum and probably private school as well. So I'm going to share just briefly with you some information that will hopefully help you get on the right track, because it's always beneficial when we can start out right and stay on that right path. So when you're looking at Native communities, if you do not have a contact with them initially, and you're looking for their website, you're looking for their tribal headquarters, I would encourage you to look at those nations, do some research online, find out what are the treaty rights that are with that sovereign nation. So with the American Indian Library Association, we work with tribal libraries of all kinds. We work with libraries of all kinds, serving tribal communities. There are currently 567 federally recognized tribes. These are all sovereign nations. So it's important to understand that, because when you are looking to engage with that government, that's intergovernmental relationships. That is being cognizant that there is a different way of doing business with these people within this group. And so for some of them, you know, they have a programming office, and you would just be able to contact the program coordinator and say, hi, I'm with the library. I would like to join your next cultural fair. I would like to invite you to join us for a cultural fair. Can you give us some ideas on some books that your community members really enjoy? Can we have a story time in the park? You know, just really trying to bridge from library services in your community to the tribal community as well. So it's important to know what the local history is, and understanding and recognizing sovereignty, because sovereignty is something that isn't always a known factor, and it's very important for everyone to know. So like for me, I am a tribally enrolled member of the Santee Sioux Nation. I'm also a resident of the state of Missouri, and I'm a United States citizen. So it's important to recognize that that trifecta of identities is something that I'm aware of. And depending upon my role in which community I'm in, I respond to others based upon that information. So when you're planning to collaborate with tribes and community members, it's important to understand those factors, because that's really the basis of and foundation of relationship building. And it's looking at values. Libraries always want to align their values with other communities so that you can scale up and branch out. And this is a great way to do that. It's important to be cognizant of what is important to the Native and tribal community, so that you are approaching them in an inclusive way and helping them also be seen within the community. So as we build relationships, we always ask people what they need. It's generally not a great practice to tell folks what they want or need from their library. And a lot of times people just don't know, you know, the libraries just evolve and grow and transform, and we're almost living beings. And so it's great to say, hey, did you know that the library offers this? Did you know that the library has this? And it's just something to, you know, appeal to them. And maybe it's just, you're just meeting for the first time, or you're sending over a informational packet or even an activity kit showing them what your library can do to help support members of their community as well. And a big thing in tribal communities, and this is an easy button all day long for everyone, is engaging with environmental causes, because we're all in this together. It's all of our responsibility to make sustainable decisions so that we provide the best service to each other, and that we are taking care of the earth, because Mother Earth takes care of us. So more thoughts on learning about Native culture. And this is true for any culture, but specifically this is focused on Native Americans. And when I speak about Native Americans, I'm also including American Indians, Indigenous peoples, and those who identify with their tribal affiliation. Like for me, I'm Dakota, but my tribe is the Santee Sioux Nation. So that's our federally recognized name. But if you were to ask me, I am a Dakota woman. So learning about Native people and the impact of colonization onto their society is important, because oftentimes if you live around a tribe, you'll see that they tend to stay within a small area which is usually called the reservation. And that is also a federal treaty right. And that is an allotment of land that has been provided to the tribal members for them to live on. So when you're looking at engaging with those communities, it's important to be able to recognize how protocols work in the community, but especially for urban and public libraries who don't live right next to a reservation, it's important to recognize and understand that we're still here and we're also urban modern people, and we just happen to reside in the city now. So you do have Native people in your community, whether they identify as such with your library or not is up to the individual. But for most communities in North America, of course, you do have Indigenous people that are residing there. So this is meant to be helpful information for anyone who is planning on providing programs. So it's important to always maintain that appropriate level of communication. Sometimes you'll hear in the mainstream folks talk about spirit animals. And I always bring up the pug because I'm a little pug dog lover. And you'll hear people say, oh, my spirit animal is the pug because I like to eat and lay around. That's not really an appropriate thing to say. Although I can see that, that's meant to be cute and that they're recognizing, that their character traits resemble that of a little fluffy dog. In some cultures that believe in the spirit animal form, that's a sacred matter. And so we don't tell people what's important. We don't tell people what to recognize. We don't tell people what's sacred to them. And we never tell anyone how to feel. So it's important to be cognizant of that. And as we start to integrate more within the mainstream, so welcoming every culture in, including every culture in, and learning more about their ways, values, and traditions, it's important to be able to hear that information, receive it, and apply it. So harmful mascots, that's something that is a movement, which is actually a global movement because there are Indigenous peoples across the globe. And it's important for us to understand the importance of mascots, imagery, and stereotypes. Because again, if we can't tell people how to feel, we shouldn't tell them that they should be honored either. And so a lot of our school libraries operate out of schools that have Native American mascots. And that has a harmful effect on youth. There are many studies that have proven the harmful effects on youth as they feel misappropriated or their culture and ways in mainstream society. So I encourage everyone to think in terms of programming and what have you, to be sensitive to that cultural identity and to recognize that it's not going to be appropriate to say, this gender has this label, or that, this age group has this label. And stereotypes as labels are very harmful. And we know that in all contexts, in all societies. It's not any different in Native American ones. I say that being cognizant of living in the Kansas City metropolitan area, where there is a football team that associates with Chiefs. And I've heard and read many comments online from people saying, well, what's wrong with that? Chief is a good thing. That's not derogatory. Well, again, if we're going to use cultural context, a chief is something very different than a young man playing a football game on a field and getting paid millions of dollars. In our communities, chiefs are people, are elders who we honor because of their service to the community, because of the work that they do, because of the representation, because of everything in their life work that they stand for has always been one of service. And so, yes, in the mainstream past, recreational pastimes, that's a service to the community. I am aware of that as well. But, there can be other names. And so if something is harmful to someone, that's not really something that we should continue to uplift. So in library specific programming, if there's any kind of a bookmark contest where we're going to ask students to draw certain Native culture images, it's something to remain cognizant of. And when you're also doing crafts for program time, it's important to stay away from costumes. And that includes headdresses, which are not in every tribal community, nor are they gender specific. But when you're looking at regalia, which is the honored attire of tribal members as they gather in ceremony, it's important to be cognizant of that. You wouldn't want students to make crafts and don costumes that would be offensive to anyone else. So again, it's recognizing that Native Americans, we're still here and we still practice our culture, our traditions, and our ways, and that our values are as important as anyone else's. So in your story time, after craft time, after everyone is honored and not labeled, when you talk about gifts of storytelling, and this is in any demographic, not just in schools, this is especially important actually in the adult demographic. Who owns the copyright of a story? Native American tradition is deeply rooted in oral storytelling tradition, where stories are gifts that are given and handed down through generations and held within certain families even. So if you were to hear of a story because you were invited to participate, that is why you would receive that knowledge. That is why that information would be shared with you. But when we look at published works, and we're going to get into that a little bit further, it's important to look at who is the author, how did they obtain this information, and who is the publisher. We need to look at all of those factors of the vetting process to make sure that this is truly an inclusive story that has been obtained in a rightful manner, and that you actually do have permission to share this information. Because in a lot of tribal communities, stories are never meant to be sold, and they're not to be told outside of the community either. So those are things that I want you to be cognizant of as you work with tribal librarians and tribal community members, so that you can help ask those questions beforehand and say, what is appropriate? What would you like me to do? What are some stories that can be told and shared? And then in the context of workplace fun times, I've heard many a time, and I'm sure you have as well, a colleague saying, oh, well, let's go have a powwow about that later. And so I want to share with you what a powwow is. A powwow is a beautiful cultural ceremony. It doesn't have anything to do with business, decision-making, or money. A powwow is a time for a host community to welcome in other members of communities to engage in fellowship, dance, singing, and prayer. Dancers come from all over, representing their nation. We all have different practices and traditions. So some have different dance styles. The regalia is different. They have different songs. The majority of us all gather around the drum. The drum being a very sacred instrument and not one to be misappropriated. The drum is the voice of our ancestors who are still with us and always will be. So as we gather in a good way to engage in ceremony and to have all these beautiful factors of life blending together, it really doesn't have anything to do with let's go shoot the breeze about something. Let's go have the real meeting after the meeting. So I'm sensitive about powwow just because it has always been such an important part of my life. And I want to make sure that everyone understands the importance of that as well. So I mentioned conducting research, looking at the validity of your sources. And as librarians, a lot of times we assume that if something's published by a publisher, it's been vetted and it's good stuff. These are good people. This is good information. But I encourage you, if you are looking at Native stories, to look at the copyright date. While we deselect on date, oftentimes there are not a lot of titles available. As we remember from the graph, if 1% of characters are of Native American descent, you might not have a lot of resources at your disposal to be able to select from. So a really important factor for us to consider is identifying who is the author. Are they Native American? Are they of this community that they're writing about? And do they have the right to disseminate that information outside of it? Practices being different in any culture, communication standards being different, again, we need to make sure that this is actually credible information from an accurate source. So when you're building your diverse collection and you're looking at identifying these specific titles, it's good to look for reviews online from other Native authors, community members, practitioners, professionals, librarians, educators, parents, readers of all kinds. Because you will often see that there is an author who maybe traveled through an area, conducted an interview or two, somehow gathered information and decided to write a book. And since there's a lot of opportunity with all the challenges and barriers not being addressed from the publishing world, we can see that those voices get lifted because we don't have a lot of information to compare it to. So in any collection, you're always going to want to look at, is this a document that is credible? Are there different formats available for all types of accessibility? And if there aren't, why not? You want to look at the different ways that you procure this information so that you're making sure you're curating a collection that is really going to be valuable. And again, something that just shows the libraries always being intentional and inclusive. So I always encourage everyone to read and verify reviews or reach out to someone that you know that works in the field. The American Indian Library Association, we do receive emails on occasion from folks saying, I'm interested in this title. Can you tell me more about it? Do you know anything about the community? And we usually refer them right back to the tribal community. Again, most tribal communities have a website and a tribal headquarters with a phone number that you can call to contact them. So when we're identifying who's missing in our community, of course, it's not just Native Americans. We need to identify all of the demographics of everyone who lives there. So reviewing your different reports to locate information is a great place to start. And a lot of public libraries invest in databases, and you can have access to those reports and be able to use that data to share information. Another source that librarians have at their disposal is their ILS and their catalog. Now, not all libraries use that source of information the same. Some libraries feel that that is just a classification system that holds data, but they don't actually engage with that data and use it. Other libraries do a great job of mining that data and using those reports as a basis for information, and so that they can make sound decisions. When you're looking at area calendar of events, look at the communities that are having special events throughout the community and ask yourself, how has the library engaged with that community? Have we hosted a program? Have we attended a program? If they're a service agency, have you provided embedded service with them? As we identify community service agencies, it's always good to cast the widest net as we can within our service area and to always think of ways that we can collaborate and share information, because the power of libraries is very strong and it's even greater when we work together. And then specifically collaborating with your school librarians is a great way to find about the needs of students and their families in your community. In our Northeast community here in Kansas City, we have school data where they shared with us, we have over 50 languages spoken in homes. And so that's great information to know as we curate an inclusive collection. looking at how can we get those materials into our libraries and how can we engage with those families as well. So as you continue to network in your career, there are several membership groups that I would like to share with you. And this information is also in the wonderful LibGuide that Caroline has created for us. So the American Indian Library Association, the Asian Pacific American Library Association, the Black Caucus of the American Library Association, the Chinese American Library Association, and Reforma, the National Association to Promote Library and Information Services to Latinos and the Spanish speaking. So these groups have all collaborated for a long time, and we will continue to collaborate in the future as well. As we share information, we scale up, we program together, we have conferences together, we have monthly meetups together. Anyone can join these membership groups. You do not have to be a racial or ethnic minority of these areas to be a member. Membership is open to everyone, and we always appreciate allies. So if you want to learn more about a specific group, I encourage you to go to their website and see what they have going on. Now, a lot of their stuff is member only in regard to like their private professional development events, any kind of monthly meetup. But if they have a conference, that will always be on their website. And so these 5 organizations come together under the umbrella. We are all members of the Joint Council of Librarians of Color. And JCLC is this wonderful organization that brings together all of these member groups, brings together individuals who don't even belong to those groups. And again, allies, anyone can join and participate in these events. So we are currently working on our conference for 2022, and it's going to be in October, and it's at this beautiful exclusive property in Florida. So we're hopeful that we will be gathering in person at that time. It's about 18 months away still, but the Joint Council of Librarians of Color has, they have information channels on social media, as well as you can just email them and contact them through their website. So there's a lot of information that's available out there if you're wanting to engage. So for community engagement, we have so many opportunities to serve all members of our communities. And it's important to start with a good plan. So as you strategize to support your community, it's something where you always want to meet face-to-face if possible, because that's a great way to identify your goals and to have a conversation and to listen effectively to make sure that you're aligning your mission, that your goals are similar, and that you're going to be able to support each other. So when you're engaging with your community at that local level, asking people what they need from their library often can be a challenge, because there are several barriers that we don't always identify or that we take care of. And so we're librarians, let's figure this out and get it right. We can conduct surveys in person, we can conduct surveys online, we can go out to where the people are, we can ask people to provide us information there. And another thing is, when we're asking for information, we should offer matters of convenience. So we should be offering drop-in times for people to come and engage with us, learn more about our services, programs, and just really be able to identify what they're needing from their library and how we can help them. So hosting an open house for collaboration is a great way to engage with the community, because in most communities, you see movement at some point. People will move in and out of communities. And so it's always a good way to capture those new members, and then also members that are starting to engage more in the community. Post-COVID, I have high hopes that libraries are going to be able to open our doors widely and receive and welcome in even more community members than we did before. As people have been home during this crazy time and they're not entirely sure what was in their community before, but we keep on raising up our stories. We keep on saying the value of our library and how we can engage. I'm very hopeful that we're going to have even more people feel that they belong in their library and they're going to come back. So as you conduct focus groups, just being cognizant of their time frame, what they're needing, when they're available. Again, those are some of the barriers where maybe one channel is better than the other in or digital presence. And when you interview your stakeholders, you need to identify who a stakeholder is. And within any public library setting, of course, it's all of your taxpayers, all of your residents, all of your constituency, patron, member, customer, however your library chooses to categorize them. And one way for you to get out there is to attend fairs and neighborhood association meetings. That's a great way to collaborate. I see that Nate did he unmute himself? I see the blocks on Nate's name. And for those of you that don't know, I'm picking on Nate because he is my husband. He's a librarian at the wonderful Johnson County Library. And I see that several of his colleagues are here with us today as well. So they are the library system supporting the Metro on the Kansas side. We actually have 6 library systems in Kansas City serving members of urban, suburban, exurban, rural areas. So Kansas City is a little bit spread out. Not to call you out, Nate, but I just called you out.
I think that was an unmuting accident.
So we're just moving right along here, and I hope I haven't lost anyone yet. We have, I think we had another poll. Caroline, did you see what poll was coming up next?
Let's see. We have a couple different ones left on diversity at work and serving Native American community members. I'm not sure.
Let's do the diversity at work real quick.
Okay. So you should be seeing that poll now. We'll leave it up for 30 more seconds. Okay, it looks like most people have had a chance to respond, so I will share the results.
Great. Well, this is, again, a nice blend. I'm glad to hear that the majority have heard of intersectionality. And as we're talking about inclusive programs and displays, we'll be getting to displays here in a little bit. It's good to be able to think about all of the different identities that we all have as individuals. And for those of us that maybe don't feel too comfortable at work, these are the steps we're taking to get there. As we share information and we educate ourselves and our colleagues on what is acceptable, what is appropriate, and what is necessary, we'll continue to grow as a profession. And again, I have every faith in librarianship that we are all information professionals who are here to gather in a good way, always share information openly, and be supportive of one another. So I'm hopeful that as we continue to have these learning opportunities online, this is really going to be a great way for us to continue to scale up so that we can all participate and continue to encourage learning and also engage with that information and see how we can use this information in our own libraries and bring it back to our colleagues in management. So when we look at program best practices, when we think about inclusive programs, it's really programs of any kind. When you're gonna start out with your planning tools and you think about your storyboard, what story are you trying to tell? Who do you want to engage with? How are you going to get there? A good way to have a native focus is, again, honoring the characters involved and your relationship with the land. Program best practices also have a gray area that we don't talk about enough. And so the best practice that I always encourage people to think about in terms of program planning is looking at your frequency. Do you only recognize Native Americans during November, during Native American Heritage Month? Do you only recognize your Latino community from September 15th to October 15th? Every February comes around, do you only recognize African Americans in your community during that time? I would hope that you continue to blend all of your programs and that you continue to offer thematic programs as well, but continue to do it on a scale where it's throughout the year, because your community is always engaging with your library, and you should want to continue to offer that welcoming space where everyone feels that they belong. So when we're looking at how we can plan the stage to have this supportive environment, we need to make sure that everyone is showing respect to others as they engage with others within that space. This is important when you also have passive programming, such as your displays and just merchandising your stacks. You know, what do your shelves look like? Is this an appropriate way to highlight your materials? And is this going to really be a respectful place and setting for everyone to gather and feel comfortable during the presentation? Of course, we want to encourage everyone to participate when they're there. But we need to make sure that we don't have verbal outbursts. And that's important in a Native themed program if you have a speaker who speaks other languages other than English, because there are different dialects and they're just different ways of communicating and expressing themselves, sometimes verbally or audibly. And so we want to make sure that participants are engaged and participating, but that they remain cognizant of the sensitivity behind the communication as it is expressed. So specifically, you wouldn't want young students doing calls, making calls, no whooping sounds, nothing that would be considered offensive, because although youth are young, they're impressionable. And this is the time that we set that stage and make sure that everyone understands we're here to listen and have a good time today. And if your storyteller or your presenter specifically gives them lines to interact and engage with them and says, you know, when I say this, you say this, or when I do this, you do this, or if it's a music program and they're provided with instruments, you know, that instruction will be there. So that's another great way to make sure that the space is held in an inclusive way so that everyone feels good about attending and being a part of that. So as we survey participants for feedback at the end, it's always important to use that information, not just conduct the survey for the sake of conducting the survey. If you're looking at planning your programs a year in advance, that's good information to go off of, but it's even better information to survey people for what they aren't seeing and what they need and want from their community. So when you're looking at how you can provide inclusive programs, the other thing that I want to encourage you to do is to think in terms of intersectionality and marginalization. Because if you don't see people in your library, that is a key indicator that they do not feel that they belong in that space, that they are not welcomed, and that they don't have a role in that community. That's not what libraries stand for. We are here to provide inclusive services, programs, materials. So we do that by making sure that we're very thoughtful in all of our planning. So when we talk about displays, and we're scheduling themes based on mainstream issues, we're scheduling themes based on national recognition, like different months or what have you. It's important to be able to gauge the reaction to the public and to also survey folks who engage with that display. You know, have a way that they can engage with you and tell you this was a good display or this was not helpful. And you can make decisions on the fly a little bit more easily. I've seen some questionable displays online before that I thought, that wouldn't do. I wouldn't prefer to see that in my library. And sometimes people just aren't necessarily thinking about the sensitivity, the cultural sensitivity. And so developing that competency takes time, takes development, and takes a professional development plan so that we can all seek out this information, we can share this knowledge, and we can create these safe learning spaces where we can all shine and be our best, because we all want our libraries to shine. So when you talk about best practices, following the mainstream isn't always going to work for your community. So being cognizant of global, national, local needs is a great place for you to start when you're looking at inclusive programs. Uh-oh, there we go. So if you're looking at having a mock award, I would encourage you to include the AILA Awards. So this is a biannual award ceremony that we have, and it recognizes youth literature awards. We're able to select from all of the different stories that are sent from publishers, and it's a great way to engage with Native stories and to learn more about those communities. Another collaboration between AILA and APALA is Talk Story, where we provide annual grants to libraries so that they can have different programs, storytelling events, and be able to provide information to their communities. So that announcement's coming up soon as to hearing more about this year's awards. And when you're looking for more information on how you can have book talks, looking for activity kits, seeking out reviews, all these program-based tools, it's a good place to start is We Need Diverse Books. And that's a wonderful website that has different resources, tools, kits, reviews for you online. And as well as the American Indian and Children's Literature site, Dr. Debbie Reese and Dr. Jean Mendoza are the two principals there who provide a lot of information. It's just an abundance of information. It's a wealth of knowledge that they share. And we are very thankful to Dr. Reese and her team for always reviewing all of these titles that come out and really providing that information that we need to be successful. So looking at some planning questions, why is it important to hear stories about your culture? Well, that helps you feel good. It helps you be recognized and know that you're welcome. And so as we plan for inclusion and we increase our diversity, it's always important to look at what tools and resources are available, because those are easy buttons for us. So the Lee and Low blog has information for people of all kinds. This is a great blog on race, diversity, and education. So I encourage you to check out their blog. That will also be in your resource list. And then here's another fun free resource, and that's from Marlena Miles, who's an artist. She's up in Minnesota, and so she has these great coloring sheets that are available on her website. And those are free for educators. So this year, we were very proud to announce our Caldecott winner. We Are Water Protectors. And this wonderful book is by Carol Lindstrom and illustrated by Michaela Goad. And there is this really fun water protector pledge that students can take. And this activity kit is available on Macmillan online resources. This was a first for a Native American author to win the Caldecott. So AILA has a new Read Native program where we're encouraging adults, youth, teens, and children to participate in reading more about Native communities, Native stories, and by Native authors. As we continue to collaborate with PBS on different things, we also like to uplift the wonderful Molly of Denali series, which has a great resource kit available on their website. They have videos on demand, and there is so much learning and sharing of Indigenous knowledge through this program. Celebrating Native poetry, this should be all the time. And we are so proud of our US Poet Laureate, Joy Harjo, in her third term. We like to make sure that everyone engages with the poetry and again, sharing that beautiful art with others. There are bookstores that have native content and materials available, and these also have book groups and author talks, free resources. They all have websites that you can find more information from. This year, HarperCollins worked with Cynthia Leidick-Smith, who is another award-winning author, on introducing their new Heart Drum imprint. So we are very much looking forward to all of the new content that's going to be published out of this imprint as well. So I look forward to seeing these books in all of our libraries in the very near future. So as I transition over to a wrap up of sorts, we're going to talk a little bit more about tools and how we can engage with our community to provide inclusive programs and services. Looking at Caroline's DEI LibGuide, that's a great LibGuide. There's a lot of LibGuides online, and you can seek that information out through a quick web search. Our friends at the American Library Association have this wonderful public program office that has information for grants and author talks and story times and checklists, and it's just a wealth of resources that are available at your fingertips. So I encourage you to seek out the ALA. And we also have anti-racism resources from Dr. Nicole Cook, Augusta Baker Chair in South Carolina. And we also have some resources from Project Enable to look at disability services, Project Thrive to look at the LGBTQ community, specifically in teens, and other resources such as Black Lives Matter at School. Because when we're talking about inclusion, everyone should see themselves in their library. So overarching goals, why is inclusive programs important? How does your work align with the goals of the library and the mission? How does it support? When you're looking at short-term and long-term strategy, we always have easy wins, we have low-hanging fruit, but let's become even more strategic in looking at how we can scale up and really provide inclusive services that encompasses everything, even outside of the lens of programs. We all enjoy doing programs. It's fun, it's engaging. We love planning for the future and being able to connect with our community, but it falls outside of that as well. And so in order for us to be able to have an inclusive lens, we need to have colleagues who also represent other areas and not just one type from one community, because those are the folks who know about library school or want to engage with the library. We need to cast a wider net with recruitment. So how can we reach our community and reach our goals? Well, we keep telling our stories and we make sure that we find a seat at the table for ourselves so that we are always out there and engaging. So when you're looking at your inclusive target audiences, of course, there are many interest groups that you can seek out to support, and you look at your collection, what you have and materials that will support sharing information, and what are some resources that those community members could bring in and collaborate with you on. Do you have someone who is a musician and does this great work? Do you have an artist who can teach others their art? Do you have people who are experts in their field or area of community service? How can they share information through the library? And then of course, when you're looking at a holistic annual program calendar, you can look at all the different themes that are out there, seasons, age groups, looking at all the different demographical factors. And when you're researching to cast that wider net of what are some things that you haven't been engaging in, look at things that, again, are easy and quick to do, but also be very intentional. And I encourage you to look at the bigger items in society that aren't being addressed, the bigger conversations that need to be had. how can we facilitate library as a safe space so that everyone feels that there is something there for them at the library and that they trust librarians to provide this information and that we're all in this together. When you're looking at specific program areas by age, of course, again, you're limited by time and resources and budget, but there's so many different ways that you can provide cultural programming, lifelong learning, leisure, professional enrichment. You know, there's so many different things that we can focus on and really be able to provide pop-up programming in the park or embedded services at a service agency. Having a mobile unit, if your library has that, to engage and roll out in the community and bring that library experience out to where people are. It's important to look at what people care about because, of course, that's how you show them that you're here to serve. So tactics, we all know the tactics, but here's some program processes for you to consider as you look at how you can start right and end right. And of course, that's always conducting assessments and evaluations. So you need to know what people want to learn from their library. You have to ask them. You can't just make decisions because oftentimes when that happens, it becomes a challenging one for staff when they feel that they put forth all these efforts and they had the plan in place, but a factor came up that derailed that experience and they only had one or no one show up. That's disheartening. Sometimes weather happens and we can't help that. But if we know that there's a large community event the second Saturday in May, we should probably avoid the second Saturday of May. If we know that parents have a lot to juggle on weeknights and bringing their child to a library program might not be as convenient as they need it to, that's probably not the time that you want to have that program scheduled. And when we're looking at how we can provide that safe space, we want to make sure that the venue is appropriate. It's the right size. You're going to have, and especially in these days, when we do get back to in-person programming, if we need to have social distancing protocols in place, we just need to be even more thoughtful and deliberate in how we're creating those inclusive program spaces so everyone feels welcome, engaged, and involved, those that are wanting to anyway. So anything libraries, you know, libraries, we all share information. They have a great merchandising kit that's available. And so what I really appreciate from their plan is that they use the word think method for arranging their materials. So their displays all have an icon along with a word. So that's really helpful to creating that inclusive experience for folks where English is not their first language. Looking at signage and wayfinding, making sure that, again, you're using universal iconography is something that is always going to set your library aside as a great public space who's thoughtful and intentional. So when you're looking at assessment, PLA project outcome is a great tool for you to look at. You can measure the 4 outcomes: knowledge, confidence, application, and awareness of your program attendees. And then it covers those 7 areas: civic and community engagement, digital learning, economic development, education, lifelong learning, early childhood literacy, job skills, and summer reading. So there is a survey tool for each one of those areas. It's really easy to use, and of course it's free, so you can't beat that. And an important part of evaluation is being able to tell the value of your story to your community. And there are some folks who do not want to hear return on investment strategy when they're thinking of their library or talking about their library. But I do have an MBA, so we're going to talk about return on investment. It's really important that librarians share the value of their work and that we're recognized as leaders in community engagement and development, because we truly are. So this was a study that I conducted a few years ago, just using this tool, which is at the Library Research Service Center, the Library Value Calculator, and some of your libraries use this tool. You have it as a widget on your website. You have it printed off when anyone gets their receipt from the kiosk showing their due date. It'll say, you know, by using your library, you saved this much this year. that's something that shows the value and tells that added value story for us. We can't be at every table at all times. We can't be on every flyer, leaflet, brochure, website. But these little tools, when all together, it helps tell our story so that people make that connection. And they say, oh yeah, my library is pretty great. I do receive this value. This did help me. And that's really what we're here to do. So when you're looking at your programs, it's good to look at factors of attendance and overall program cost and what was overhead. And if you don't use all of those factors, use the ones that work for you. But just make sure that you're able to tell the story. How many hours are your meeting rooms used? Who's engaging in those spaces? How many community members are gathering at your library? It's something where it's easy to do a valuation model on those parameters. You just have to be able to gather those and disseminate that data so that you can craft a beautiful informational report. So we are right on time, and I can't thank you all enough for being here today. I wish I had another hour, but that's a little too much of Cindy, and I'm going to share with you a whole bunch of information at the end as well. So I'm open to any questions you have.
Thank you so much. So please type your questions in the chat, and I will keep an eye on that. And I also meant to ask the audience members 2 questions while you were presenting, Cindy, and I will just type that in there right now if they have any favorite diverse authors they would like to share, or literature awards and programs that they've found useful. Feel free to type your recommendations in the chat as well. And Cindy, would you like me to run the final poll, or?
Sure, that could be fun.
Or there's also one of serving Native American community members that I didn't know if you wanted me to share that one.
Either one's fine, yeah. You could probably just do the last one.
Okay.
Since we're wrapping up here. So as we're talking about assessment and programming, of course, we tailor these surveys to be what we want the outcome to be. And sometimes we need to be a little bit more neutral. So it's important to have someone else review your questions. As you can see, my 3rd question is in jest. And I just wanted to show you that that's an easy way, again, that we can say, we're the best. Look at us. We are rock stars. We're so inclusive. We're so amazing and phenomenal. And well, we really are. You want to make sure that your program tool is also inclusive and that it's asking the right questions to the right people. All right. So did we have any questions?
We have not had any yet.
Okay. Well, one thing really important that I see Diane put into chat is Race Project KC. And if anyone wants to pop that link in, that is a wonderful program as well for people to consider. And, how can you use that in your community? What are some ways that you also engage with your community? I think a lot of times libraries do more than they may even know at times, just because we're so busy and we're always going, but we have to be able to capture anecdotal evidence and tell those stories, because otherwise it gets lost in the shuffle of life. And if we can't show how inclusive and open and welcoming we are, we can't expect anyone else to tell that story for us.
I see some favorite authors are shared as well.
Oh, great.
And I can ask a question while we give the audience members a second to type theirs in if they have any. Here we have one federally recognized tribe, the Catawba Indian Nation, and I have so much trouble finding good books to have in my collection that represent this tribe. And I've talked to someone I know that's a member of the nation and was actually, I believe, a tribal leader's granddaughter. And there's just very little published. And what has been published was from outside voices that she said they considered very inaccurate and not good representations. So we had thought about, she had told me that she was talking to people about getting some things published, because there is a rich oral history tradition there. But if you have any advice for that situation, I'd be interested.
Right. Well, it's like I shared earlier, and this happens frequently in tribal communities. And, we have a simple ask: nothing about us without us, but anyone should say that. Don't write about people you don't know about and that you're not living that life with them. It's an interesting balance between the oral storytelling tradition, the tribal protocols. Maybe this isn't a community that even wants the written word introduced. And so there are challenges to that. But yeah, I would always start with the tribe itself, contacting their headquarters and seeing what are some resources that they value. What are some materials that they share with their families and students? A lot of reservations also have their own school. So contact their school librarian. They should be a great resource for you as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, and Elizabeth brought up that she just read a collection of poems by Joy Harjo, and they were beautiful. And I'm actually presenting with PBS Books next Tuesday night. I have the ultimate honor and privilege of interviewing Miss Harjo in American Sunrise. And I also received her anthology, When the Light of the World Was Subdued, Our Voices Came Through. I received that for my birthday present. And it's a delightful anthology. It shares poems and stories from all over the country. So I highly recommend that beautiful anthology as well. We have other favorite authors in here. Of course, Jacqueline Woodson's a great one. Nikki Grimes, The Night Diary. Of course, Jason Reynolds, just so many diverse authors that are out there, but we need even more. And so it's important that librarians continue to highlight their work and share that information so that everyone has access to it. Especially when we're also, curating our digital collection. You'll often see that we may have one or two titles, one or two copies, and the holds list is horrendous. It's important that we look at how we can reallocate our resources to meet the current need as those shift within communities. Oh, thank you. Kristen put the Race Project KC link into chat, so you guys have access to that. And I'm not seeing any additional questions at this time. But again, I thank you all for joining us today. This was a great opportunity to be able to share information so that we continue to scale up in our efforts, become as inclusive as we possibly can, while also giving ourselves grace and understanding that we can't know all things. So you just need to ask.
Great. Thank you very much, Cindy Hohl. It was great to have you with us today. And I wish you all the best, and thank you for our attendees as well. And you will be receiving an email shortly with an evaluation link talking about assessment again. So be sure to fill that out. And we will also, I see the question about the recording. Yes, we are recording, and I will send that out within 1 to 2 business days. So please look for that as well. All right. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.